many people, I feel, when you say seaweed, they think that it doesn't really affect them, that it's just something that you see down at the beach or you might eat in a Japanese restaurant. But I'd like to tell you that almost everybody in this room has already had contact with seaweed already today. It's in your toothpaste. It's on your clothes. It's on the walls of your houses. When you eat your supper, you may have seaweed in there. It's in your pint of beer, and it's there in your medicine cabinet to settle your stomach at the end of a day before you go to bed. But what is seaweed? And more particularly, what isn't seaweed? So seaweed is not a land plant. Seaweed is the generic term which we give to a very varied range of species which live in the marine environment. Seaweeds do not need land, fresh water, or fertilizer to grow, which are key requirements for a lot of terrestrial biomass. Land plants need to fight against gravity, so they put a lot of energy into producing a compound called lignin, which helps them to grow upright. Seaweed does not need lignin. Instead, it is full of compounds called hydrocolloids, and these are sort of jelly-like compounds that help seaweed to bend and sway in the water rather than break. Land plants need to be specialized. They have leaves where they photosynthesize, they have stems, and they have roots where they take up water and nutrients. Seaweed doesn't need to specialize in this way. It's able to photosynthesize and to take up nutrients over the entirety of its form. It's also able to photosynthesize at very low levels, so it can photosynthesize at 0.02% of the light levels that you have at the surface. So this means it can start growing in very deep water. And collectively, what this means is that the seaweed can grow very efficiently and very well. It can reach sizes and at rates which is not possible with land plants. The giant kelp, a macrocystis, can grow up to 60 centimetres a day and can grow up to 45 metres in length. When the seaweed is photosynthesizing, it is taking carbon dioxide and it is capturing it as organic carbon within the seaweed. 11% on average of seaweed that is removed by particulates and by storm damage ends up in the deep ocean. And when it's down there, it remains non-decomposing for over 100 years, which we could class as sequestration. And carbon capture and sequestration are key in our fight to mitigate climate change. Cultivated seaweeds will also sequester carbon in this way. And when we cultivate seaweed, we cultivate 36 million tons of seaweed every year. So that's an awful lot of carbon that is also being sequestered in this fashion, just naturally, whilst we are also generating the seaweed that we want to use for food and for products. When we cultivate seaweed, we take our preferred way to cultivate it is through a process called vegetative growth. This is where we take a small part of mature seaweed, tie it onto ropes and strings, and put it out to sea, and it will grow into a new, full-grown, mature seaweed, which we can harvest within a month. And this means that they can have multiple harvests throughout the year. Cultivation happens predominantly in Asia, with China the main producer. And I want to show you this slide. I wanted to give you an image of the seaweed farm and the scales, but you can't actually get a photograph of it because it's so large. So this is a computer-generated image of part of China here. And I like it because it's got a scale on it, so you can see just the enormous area that is being covered with seaweed. So what are we doing with this seaweed? Well, the main use of seaweed is for food, and I will talk about that in a minute, but I'm just going to cover some of the other uses of seaweed first. So seaweed has got very high levels of elements and nutrition in it, and we use this in animal feeds and pet foods because it will increase those compounds in foods to sort of give animals better health and better condition. When we look at biofertilizers and biostimulants, we're looking at other parts of seaweed. So we're looking at things called phenols, which are like the tannins that you get in tea, which makes your tea go brown, and particular carbohydrates and nitrogen-based compounds. Seaweeds can also be grown whole and then dried, ground up and then put into capsules, and this goes in the supplement market. So many of you might have heard of the compound sea moss, which is a type of seaweed which is a health beneficial product. I have product additions on here as well. So this, I feel, is quite a small area, but it's very obvious when it happens. So this is where you have seaweed being put into food, like seaweed soap or seaweed butter or in seaweed cosmetics. And then finally, we have packaging here. So this is a relatively new area, but I think it's very exciting. And it's using seaweed to make everything from sachets to very fixed, firm materials, plastic-like packaging. But the main use, as I said before, is as food. Now, when we talk about food, we think about maybe sushi or something that says seaweed on it. So it might be seaweed snacks or seaweed flaked condiments or even seaweed beer. But if you remember what I was saying earlier about what the seaweeds are made of, these hydrocolloids, these jelly-like compounds that help the seaweed to move in the water, well, we can extract those and we use them extensively in the food industry. So there are three main hydrocolloids that we use: alginate, agar, and carrageenan. And these come from three different seaweed groups. And they all have different properties, but all of them can be used in sauces, in spreads, in prepared meats, and in bakery products, particularly where you've got dairy involved there as well. So this next slide is just some examples of where we've had seaweed hydrocolloids in food. And what I want to point out here is it's not just going in the food, it's also around the foods. So the casings around sausages and around edible coatings around fruits and edible packaging is an area which is really developing as well. Companies which produce food don't have to put agar, carrageenan or alginate on their labels though. They can use E numbers instead. So anything from E400 to 407 means it's got seaweed hydrocolloids in it. And when you start looking at these packages, next time you go around the supermarket, you'll see those names and those E numbers in foods all over the place. It's everywhere when you get your eye in. But hydrocolloids aren't just used in food. They're also used in a whole range of other areas as well. As I alluded to at the beginning, they're in your toothpaste. Alginate fibres are in many different types of clothes nowadays, both what I would call sort of normal clothes, but also in specialist clothes like fire-retardant clothing. Calcium alginate is insoluble in water, and this property has also been exploited through a range of different products to generate water-resistant linings. Alginate is everywhere. It's very prevalent in ink and printing processes. So if you have a T-shirt with any kind of design that's been screen printed on it, that's almost definitely had seaweed in it during the process of its development. Likewise, in paints, alginate is a very common paint additive that's in there. And paper, almost all the paper that we use nowadays, we've got that slightly shiny surface on it, that's got an alginate coating as well. But all of these products that I've mentioned so far, apart from the toothpaste, are very unlikely to state that they have these hydrocolloids in there. However, for some medical purposes, having the hydrocolloid mentioned on there is beneficial. If you have heartburn, you want sodium alginate and a product that says that on the box. If you've got a sore which just won't heal, then you want alginate or hydrocolloid plasters. So these will take up the liquid that's been produced by the sore and will create a healing environment that will encourage reduced scarring. So these are all day-to-day uses of hydrocolloids. I want to touch on one more specialised use of hydrocolloids, which most of you have heard of, which is the agar plate. So these are used by microbiologists to grow bacteria and other microorganisms. And to give one example of where the agar plate has come into its own, this is where they first discovered antibiotics, without which many of us would unlikely be here today. Where else could we be using seaweeds and hydrocolloids? Well, there is a myriad of uses of these in very specialist areas, everything from helping heart attack victims to novel battery components. But I just want to touch on a couple of futuristic areas where these may come into their own. One is a 3D bioprinting. So there's a lot of work at the moment looking at producing bone and cartilage scaffolds out of alginate. Alginate is sort of inert within the body. It is biocompatible, which means that as the bone or the cartilage regrows, the alginate will slowly be absorbed by the body, so no further intervention is required. Looking further into the future, hydrocolloid films could be surfaces for conductive materials to bind onto, creating flexible items with wireless communication potential. In a similar vein, you could be generating smart, intelligent textiles, which would be monitoring your heartbeat and your respiration rate, and then using biodyes to signal when you have reached a certain level or stage. But this is all quite futuristic. I'm going to finish this by just reminding you of two very important points here. One is that seaweeds can naturally sequester carbon, and the more we cultivate, the more carbon we are sequestering while still generating product. And the second is that seaweed is one of the very few ingredients that we use which doesn't require land, fresh water, or fertilizer in which to grow. And with growing populations and with increased demand on land, then I feel that seaweed should be a key ingredient in our planet's future. Thank you very much.